In the shadowed corridors of Ravencrest Palace, where secrets whisper through ancient stone walls and loyalty costs more than gold, Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the royal guard for 15 years without question. He had sworn his life to protect the crown, defended the realm against foreign threats, and kept the royal family's darkest secrets buried deeper than the palace dungeons. But on this rain-soaked October evening, as thunder crashed over the kingdom of Eldoria, Marcus would discover a truth so devastating that it would shatter everything he believed about honor, duty, and the very family he had pledged to protect with his life. The revelation came not from an enemy's blade or a foreign spy's whispered intelligence, but from the innocent lips of 12-year-old Prince Adrian, third in line to the throne. What the young prince revealed about Queen Consort Isabella's hidden past would not only rock the foundations of the monarchy, but force Marcus to choose between his sacred oath and his conscience. In a world where royal bloodlines determine the fate of nations, some secrets are worth killing for, and some truths are worth dying to protect. The autumn wind howled through the battlements of Ravencrest Palace as Captain Marcus Thornfield completed his evening rounds. At 42, Marcus had dedicated more than half his life to serving the crown of Eldoria. His weathered hands, scarred from countless battles, gripped his ceremonial sword as he walked the familiar stone corridors that had become his second home. The palace, with its towering spires and Gothic architecture, stood as a testament to 8 centuries of royal rule, and Marcus had sworn to protect every stone of it. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite place why. The usual bustle of palace life had quieted to an unusual hush. Even the servants seemed to move more carefully, their footsteps muffled against the marble floors. King Edmund was away on a diplomatic mission to the neighboring kingdom of Valehaven, leaving Queen Consort Isabella to manage the palace in his absence. The queen, a woman of striking beauty and sharp intelligence, had married into the royal family 5 years ago, bringing with her a dowry that had strengthened Eldoria's economy and secured important trade agreements. Marcus paused at the entrance to the East Wing, where the royal children's quarters were located. Prince Adrian, the king's youngest son from his first marriage, had been particularly quiet lately. The boy's mother, the beloved Queen Catherine, had died in childbirth when Adrian was born, leaving the prince to be raised by a succession of governesses and tutors. When King Edmund married Isabella, many had hoped she would provide the motherly guidance Adrian needed, but the relationship between stepmother and stepson remained cordial at best. As Marcus approached the prince's chambers, he heard voices coming from within. This was unusual, as Prince Adrian typically retired early, preferring books and solitude to the company of others. Marcus hesitated, knowing he should announce his presence, but something in the tone of the conversation made him pause. Through the slightly open door, he could see Prince Adrian sitting by the fireplace with his tutor, Master Wilhelm, an elderly scholar who had served the royal family for decades. "You must understand, Your Highness," Master Wilhelm was saying, his voice heavy with concern. "Some knowledge carries a terrible burden. Once you know certain truths, you cannot unknow them." Prince Adrian, small for his 12 years but with eyes that seemed far older, looked up at his tutor with surprising maturity. "But I already know, Master Wilhelm. I've known for months. I saw the letters hidden in Queen Isabella's private study. I can read well enough to understand what they meant." Marcus felt his blood chill. Letters hidden in the Queen's study? What could a 12-year-old boy have discovered that would cause such obvious distress in his usually composed tutor? Master Wilhelm leaned forward, his lined face etched with worry. "Tell me exactly what you read, Prince Adrian. Word for word, if you can remember." The young prince took a shaky breath. The letter was from someone called Lord Garrett Blackwood. It was dated 3 months before Queen Isabella married my father. In it, Lord Blackwood acknowledged the birth of his son and promised to provide for the child in secret. He wrote that Isabella had given birth to a boy and that the child would be raised by a family in the countryside, far from court. The letter said the boy's true parentage must never be revealed because it would destroy Isabella's chances of marrying the king. Marcus pressed himself closer to the wall, his heart pounding. If what the prince was saying was true, Queen Isabella had given birth to an illegitimate child before her marriage to King Edmund. In the rigid world of royal politics, such a revelation could be catastrophic. The queen's position, the legitimacy of any future heirs, and the stability of several international alliances all depended on her reputation remaining spotless.
Master Wilhelm's face had gone pale. "Are you certain of what you read, Your Highness?"
Could you have misunderstood? I'm certain, Prince Adrian replied firmly. There was another letter, too, from just last month. Lord Blackwood was asking for more money. He said the boy was now 5 years old and showing signs of intelligence. He threatened to reveal the truth if Isabella didn't increase his payments. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not only did Queen Isabella have a secret child, but she was being blackmailed because of it. This was exactly the kind of scandal that could bring down a monarchy, especially one as carefully balanced as Eldoria's. The kingdom's recent prosperity depended heavily on trade agreements that Isabella had negotiated using her family connections. If her reputation was destroyed, those agreements could crumble, potentially plunging Eldoria into economic crisis.
Master Wilhelm stood slowly, his age seeming to weigh heavily upon him. "Prince Adrian, you must promise me something."
You must not speak of this to anyone else. The knowledge you possess is dangerous, not just to Queen Isabella, but potentially to the entire kingdom.
"But what about my father?" Prince Adrian asked, his young voice cracking slightly. "Doesn't he have a right to know?"
And what about this boy? This half-brother I apparently have. What kind of life is he living, hidden away while Isabella sits on the throne? The moral complexity of the situation wasn't lost on the 12-year-old prince, and Marcus found himself impressed by the boy's maturity even as he grappled with the devastating implications of what he'd overheard. This wasn't just about royal scandal or political maneuvering. There was a child involved, an innocent boy whose very existence was being treated as a shameful secret. Master Wilhelm sat back down, clearly struggling with the weight of the decision before him. "Your Highness, sometimes the truth serves no one. If this information were to become public, it would destroy Queen Isabella, certainly, but it might also destroy your father, the kingdom's stability, and the lives of countless innocent people who depend on the crown's strength. And what of this child? If his parentage were revealed, his life would be turned upside down. He would become a target for political enemies and a pawn in games he doesn't understand." Prince Adrian stared into the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his young face. "So we just pretend we don't know? We let Isabella continue deceiving my father? We let this boy grow up believing lies about who he is?" "Sometimes, Your Highness, the greatest act of courage is choosing to bear a burden in silence," Master Wilhelm said gently. "The question is not what is easy, or even what feels right in isolation. The question is what causes the least harm to the most people." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. As a member of the royal guard, his duty was clear: protect the royal family and maintain the security of the realm. But which course of action would best serve those goals? If he revealed what he'd learned, he could prevent future blackmail attempts and eliminate a potential threat to the king. But he could also trigger a crisis that might tear the kingdom apart. He thought of King Edmund, a good man who had worked tirelessly to modernize Eldoria and improve the lives of his subjects. The king genuinely loved Isabella and had been happier in the 5 years since their marriage than in all the years following Queen Catherine's death. How would this revelation affect him? Would it drive him to divorce Isabella, potentially destabilizing the kingdom's international relations? Or would he find a way to forgive and move forward, accepting the child as his own? Then there was Isabella herself. Marcus had observed her closely during his years of service, and he had come to respect her intelligence and dedication to her royal duties. She was not the scheming manipulator that this situation might make her appear to be. She was a woman who had made a mistake in her youth and had apparently been trying to manage the consequences as best she could. The payments to Lord Blackwood suggested she was taking responsibility for her child, even if she couldn't publicly acknowledge him. But the blackmail element changed everything. If Isabella was being extorted, then the kingdom's security was potentially compromised. Lord Blackwood could escalate his demands at any time, and there was no guarantee he would keep the secret indefinitely. Other enemies of the crown might eventually learn of the situation and use it for their own purposes. As Marcus listened, Prince Adrian asked the question that had been forming in his own mind. "Master Wilhelm, what do you think Lord Blackwood wants ultimately? Do you think he'll be satisfied with money forever, or is he working towards something bigger?" The old tutor was quiet for a long moment. Men like Lord Blackwood are rarely satisfied with simple financial gain. Your Highness. The fact that he's increased his demands suggests he may be testing the waters, seeing how far he can push. He may eventually demand political favors, information about the kingdom's defenses, or even a role at court. Once someone has this kind of leverage, their appetite for power tends to grow. This was exactly what Marcus had feared. The situation wasn't just about protecting Isabella's reputation or the king's feelings. It was about preventing a potentially dangerous man from gaining influence over the crown. Lord Blackwood was essentially holding the entire royal family hostage, and his demands would likely escalate until they became impossible to meet. Prince Adrian seemed to understand the implications as well. So by staying silent, we're not just protecting Isabella and my father. We're also protecting this Blackwood person's ability to manipulate our family, and we're abandoning his son to a life of lies and secrecy. Master Wilhelm nodded gravely. Yes, Your Highness. There are no clean choices in this situation. Every path leads to pain for someone. Marcus realized he could no longer remain hidden. The conversation was clearly coming to an end, and he needed time to process what he'd learned before deciding on his next course of action. He quietly retreated from the doorway and made his way to his private quarters in the guards' barracks. His small room, spartanly furnished with just a bed, desk, and weapon rack, had always been a place of solitude and reflection for him. Tonight, it felt like a prison. He paced the narrow space, his mind racing through the possible consequences of each action he might take. If he reported what he'd learned to King Edmund immediately, he would be fulfilling his duty as a loyal guard. But he would also be destroying the life of a woman who had done nothing worse than fall in love and make a mistake before her marriage. He would be potentially destabilizing the kingdom at a time when Eldoria could ill afford political chaos. If he confronted Isabella directly, he might be able to help her find a solution to the blackmail situation without involving the king. But this would mean entering into a conspiracy of silence, potentially compromising his own honor, and putting himself at risk if the truth eventually emerged. If he did nothing, he would be allowing the blackmail to continue, potentially putting the kingdom at risk and abandoning a child who deserved to know his true heritage. As Marcus contemplated these impossible choices, he heard a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find one of the junior guards, Timothy Ashford, a young man of 23 who had served under Marcus's command for 2 years. "Captain Thornfield," Timothy said quietly, "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but there's something I think you should know. I was on patrol in the garden earlier this evening when I saw Queen Isabella meeting with a man I didn't recognize. They were speaking in hushed tones, and she seemed very distressed. When they finished talking, she handed him what looked like a substantial purse of coins." Marcus felt his heart sink. The blackmail was ongoing, happening right under their noses. "Did you get a look at this man? Could you describe him?" Timothy nodded. He was tall, well-dressed, but not in court fashion. Dark hair, maybe 40 years of age. He carried himself like a nobleman, but there was something unsavory about him. After he left, I watched Queen Isabella for a few minutes. She looked like she'd been crying. This confirmed Marcus's worst fears. The situation was not just a historical scandal, but an active threat to the crown. Isabella was being systematically exploited, and the emotional toll was clearly devastating her. Something had to be done, but what? As Timothy left, Marcus sat heavily on his bed and buried his face in his hands. In all his years of service, he had faced enemy soldiers, foreign spies, and assassination attempts with calm resolve. But this moral labyrinth seemed impossible to navigate. Every choice seemed to lead to betrayal of someone he was sworn to protect. Outside his small window, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke. Rain lashed against the glass as thunder rumbled overhead, and Marcus couldn't help but feel that the weather was reflecting the tumult in his heart. By morning, he would have to decide which path to take. Knowing that whatever choice he made would change everything for the royal family, he had dedicated his life to serving. The secret of Queen Isabella's hidden child had been revealed, but the most dangerous part of this story was just beginning. Part 2, Dawn, broke gray and gloomy over Ravencrest Palace, the previous night's storm having left the grounds muddy and the air thick with moisture. Marcus had slept poorly, his dreams filled with conflicting images of duty and betrayal. He rose early and made his way to the chapel, a small sanctuary within the palace walls where he often went to think when faced with difficult decisions. The chapel was empty at this hour, lit only by a few flickering candles and the pale morning light filtering through stained glass windows. Marcus knelt before the altar, not in prayer exactly, but in contemplation. The stone floor was cold against his knees, a physical discomfort that somehow helped him focus his racing thoughts. He had served the crown faithfully for 15 years, but he had never faced a situation where his various duties seemed to conflict so directly with each other. His oath was to protect the royal family, but which members of that family should take priority? The king, who deserved to know the truth about his wife. Queen Isabella, who was clearly suffering under the weight of her secret. Prince Adrian, who was already burdened with knowledge too heavy for his young shoulders. Or even the unknown child, innocent of any wrongdoing, but trapped in a web of deception. As Marcus wrestled with these questions, he heard the soft sound of footsteps on stone. He turned to see Queen Isabella entering the chapel, dressed in a simple dark gown with her golden hair covered by a modest veil. She looked older than her 31 years, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Isabella started when she saw Marcus, clearly having expected to find the chapel empty. For a moment they stared at each other in silence, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that confirmed his worst fears. She knew that he knew. Somehow, despite his caution the previous night, she had become aware that her secret was no longer entirely her own. "Captain Thornfield," she said quietly, her voice steady but strained. "I didn't expect to find anyone here at this hour." "Your Majesty," Marcus replied, rising to his feet and offering a respectful bow. "I often come here to think when I'm troubled by difficult matters." Isabella moved closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "And are you troubled by difficult matters this morning, Captain?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. Marcus realized that this moment could determine the course of everything that followed. He could deflect, maintain the pretense that he knew nothing, and leave her to struggle with her burden alone. Or he could acknowledge what he knew and offer whatever help he could provide. Looking into Isabella's eyes, Marcus saw not the calculating manipulator he might have expected, but a woman drowning in circumstances beyond her control. The decision made itself. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am deeply troubled by matters that affect the security of the crown and the well-being of the royal family." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. When she opened them again, tears were threatening to spill over. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand that you are in great danger and that your situation poses risks to the entire kingdom," Marcus replied honestly. "I know about Lord Blackwood, about the payments, and about the child." Isabella sank onto one of the wooden pews, her composure finally cracking. "I suppose it was inevitable that someone would discover the truth eventually. I've been living with this sword hanging over my head for so long that I sometimes forget what it felt like to sleep peacefully." Marcus remained standing, unsure of the protocol for this unprecedented situation. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, how did Lord Blackwood first approach you? Was it before or after your marriage to the king?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, staring at the crucifix above the altar. "It was 6 months after my wedding. I thought I had escaped my past, that my son was safe with the family I had chosen to raise him. They were good people, a merchant and his wife who had been unable to have children of their own. They loved him, and he was thriving. I sent money regularly, but always through intermediaries, never making direct contact that could be traced back to me." She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Then Garrett appeared at court. He had somehow traced the money back to me, discovered my new identity, and realized what he had stumbled upon. He was charming at first, suggesting that we might find a way to work together for our mutual benefit. It wasn't until later that I understood he was already planning to use my secret against me." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the image of this man slowly tightening his grip on Isabella's life. What does he want beyond money? Surely a man cunning enough to uncover your secret and position himself at court has larger ambitions. Isabella looked up at him with surprise. "You're very perceptive, Captain. Yes, his demands have been escalating. At first it was simply money, substantial amounts, but nothing that would be noticed given my family's wealth. Recently, however, He's been asking for information about the kingdom's military capabilities, trade negotiations, and diplomatic communications. He's essentially trying to turn me into a spy against my own husband's interests. This revelation made Marcus's blood run cold. The situation was even worse than he had feared. Lord Blackwood wasn't just a simple blackmailer. He was potentially an agent of a foreign power, using Isabella's secret to gather intelligence about Eldoria's defenses and policies. Your Majesty, have you given him any of the information he's requested? Isabella met his gaze steadily. I have provided him with some documents, but nothing truly sensitive. I've been trying to give him just enough to keep him satisfied while protecting the kingdom's most important secrets. But he's becoming more demanding, and I'm running out of relatively harmless information to share. Marcus began pacing the small chapel, his mind working through the implications. Do you have any idea who Lord Blackwood might be working for? Which of Eldoria's enemies might benefit from this intelligence? I have my suspicions, Isabella replied. His questions have focused heavily on our naval capabilities and the fortifications along the eastern border. That suggests either the Kingdom of Thorn or the Merchant Republic of Solvay, both of whom have territorial disputes with Eldoria that have been growing more heated in recent months. This was valuable information, but it also made the situation exponentially more dangerous. If a foreign power was using Isabella to spy on Eldoria, then the kingdom's national security was at stake. Marcus's duty as a member of the Royal Guard was clear. He had to protect the realm from all threats, internal and external. But as he looked at Isabella, slumped in the pew with her shoulders shaking from suppressed sobs, he also saw a woman who was as much a victim as a threat. She had made a mistake years before she ever met King Edmund, and now she was being systematically destroyed by a man who had turned her love for her child into a weapon against her. Your Majesty, Marcus said gently, what of your son? How is he faring in all of this? Isabella's face softened slightly at the mention of her child. His name is Thomas, and he believes his adoptive parents are his true family. He's a bright boy, curious about everything, with a smile that could light up a room. The family I chose for him has raised him well. He's learning to read and write, he helps in their shop, and he seems happy. Does Lord Blackwood have any direct contact with him? Not yet, but he's threatened to approach Thomas directly if I don't comply with his demands. The thought of my son being drawn into this nightmare, of having his world destroyed by learning the truth from such a man, is what keeps me awake at night. Marcus understood now why Isabella had been so desperate to keep paying Blackwood's demands. She wasn't just protecting herself or even the crown. She was protecting an innocent child from becoming a pawn in a dangerous game. Your Majesty, I believe we need to consider the possibility of bringing King Edmund into this situation. He has resources and options that neither you nor I possess alone. Isabella shook her head vehemently. No, Captain, I cannot bear the thought of Edmund learning about Thomas in this way. If he discovers that I've been lying to him for years, that I've been passing information to our enemies, it will destroy him. It will destroy our marriage and potentially our kingdom's stability. But Your Majesty, if Lord Blackwood's demands continue to escalate, you may not have a choice. Eventually, he may ask for information that you cannot provide without seriously compromising Eldoria's security. What will you do then? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I've been considering more desperate measures, she admitted quietly. There are ways to ensure that Lord Blackwood can never reveal my secret. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Your Majesty, please tell me you haven't been contemplating violence. Not directly, Isabella said quickly, but I have been thinking about hiring someone who might be able to persuade Lord Blackwood to disappear permanently. This was exactly what Marcus had feared. The situation was spiraling toward a point where Isabella might commit actions that would transform her from victim to criminal. If she arranged for Blackwood's death and the plot was discovered, it would mean her execution and a scandal that could bring down the entire monarchy. Your Majesty, I must strongly advise against such a course of action. Even if you could arrange Lord Blackwood's death without the plot being traced back to you, there's no guarantee that he hasn't left evidence of your secret with associates who might continue his work. Isabella nodded miserably. I know you're right, Captain, but I'm running out of options, and I'm terrified of what might happen to Thomas if this continues much longer. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. Your Majesty, I want to help you find a solution to this problem, but I cannot do so alone, and I cannot do so by keeping secrets from the king. However, I can promise you this: if you allow me to bring King Edmund into our confidence, I will do everything in my power to present the situation in a way that emphasizes your victimization rather than your deception. Isabella looked at him with something approaching hope for the first time since their conversation began. You would do that for me? Even though my actions have potentially put the kingdom at risk? Your Majesty, I have observed you for 5 years. I have seen how you've devoted yourself to Eldoria and to King Edmund. I believe that your current situation arose from desperation, not disloyalty. And I believe that with the king's knowledge and support, we can find a way to neutralize Lord Blackwood's threat while protecting both you and your son. Isabella was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with determination in her eyes. Very well, Captain. I place my trust in you and in Edmund's capacity for forgiveness. When do you suggest we speak with him? The king returns from Valehaven tomorrow evening. I suggest we arrange a private meeting in his study, where we can speak without fear of being overheard. Isabella nodded. There's something else you should know, Captain. Yesterday evening's payment to Lord Blackwood was not routine. He has given me an ultimatum. He wants detailed plans for the new coastal fortifications by the end of this week, or he will reveal my secret to the court and approach Thomas directly. Marcus felt his heart sink. The coastal fortification plans were among Eldoria's most closely guarded military secrets. Their compromise could leave the kingdom vulnerable to naval attack and potentially spark the very war that everyone was trying to avoid. Your Majesty, under no circumstances can you provide him with those plans. The security of the entire realm depends on keeping that information secret. I know, Isabella said miserably, which means that by the end of this week, Lord Blackwood will likely have revealed everything. We have 5 days to find another solution, or this entire crisis will be out of our hands. As they sat in the chapel, both lost in contemplation of the seemingly impossible challenge ahead of them, Marcus realized that the next few days would determine not just Isabella's fate, but potentially the future of the entire kingdom. Lord Blackwood held all the cards, but perhaps with King Edmund's help, they could find a way to change the rules of the game entirely. The morning light had grown stronger, and soon the chapel would fill with the usual worshippers. Marcus and Isabella would have to return to their normal roles, pretending that the kingdom wasn't teetering on the edge of a precipice. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary, they had formed an unlikely alliance that might be their only hope of preventing disaster. Part 3. The great hall of Ravencrest Palace bustled with activity as preparations were made for King Edmund's return from his diplomatic mission to Valehaven. Servants polished silver, arranged fresh flowers, and prepared the king's favorite meals, while courtiers positioned themselves strategically to be among the first to greet him and learn the results of his negotiations. Marcus moved through the controlled chaos with practiced ease, but his mind was entirely focused on the conversation that would take place later that evening. He had spent the past 2 days refining his approach, trying to find a way to present Isabella's situation that would emphasize the threat to the kingdom rather than her personal betrayal of the king's trust. Prince Adrian had been subdued since his conversation with Master Wilhelm, and Marcus had noticed the boy watching Queen Isabella with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. The young prince was clearly struggling with the burden of his knowledge, and Marcus worried about the psychological impact of keeping such a momentous secret at such a young age. As afternoon faded into evening, the sound of horses and carriage wheels on cobblestones announced the king's arrival. Marcus took his position with the other guards as King Edmund's entourage entered the palace courtyard. The king, a man of 50 with graying hair and kind eyes that reflected both wisdom and weariness, dismounted from his horse and immediately embraced Isabella, who had been waiting on the palace steps. Marcus watched their reunion carefully, noting the way Isabella held herself rigidly in her husband's arms, the forced brightness of her smile, and the shadow of strain that crossed King Edmund's face as he looked at her more closely. The king was an astute observer of people, and it was clear that he sensed something was amiss with his wife. The formal welcome ceremony proceeded according to tradition, with various nobles and officials presenting themselves to hear the king's report on his diplomatic mission. King Edmund announced that he had successfully negotiated a new trade agreement with Valehaven that would be beneficial to both kingdoms, and that tensions along their shared border had been reduced through a series of reasonable compromises. As the official proceedings concluded and the courtiers began to disperse, Marcus approached the king. "Your Majesty, when you have had time to rest from your journey, Queen Isabella and I have an urgent matter that requires your private attention." King Edmund's expression immediately became more serious. "How urgent, Captain? It concerns the security of the realm, Your Majesty, and it cannot wait beyond this evening." The king nodded curtly. "Very well. Give me 2 hours to refresh myself and dine with my family. Then meet us in my private study." Those 2 hours passed with agonizing slowness for Marcus. He spent the time reviewing everything he knew about Lord Blackwood, and trying to anticipate the king's possible reactions to Isabella's revelations. Would Edmund's love for his wife overcome his anger at her deception? Would his duty as king supersede his personal feelings? Or would the combination of betrayal and threat prove too much for even his notably steady temperament? As the appointed time arrived, Marcus made his way to the king's study, a comfortable room lined with books and maps, where Edmund often retreated to handle the kingdom's most sensitive business. Isabella was already there, sitting rigidly in a chair across from the king's desk. She had changed into her most formal gown, as if armor might protect her from the conversation to come. King Edmund entered a few moments later, having exchanged his travel clothes for the simple but elegant attire he preferred for private meetings. He took his seat behind the desk and looked expectantly at Marcus. "Captain Thornfield, you mentioned a security threat. Please explain." Marcus took a deep breath and began. "Your Majesty, 3 days ago I inadvertently overheard information that revealed Queen Isabella was being blackmailed by a man named Lord Garrett Blackwood." "Ah." "The blackmailer has been using the Queen's past circumstances to extract both money and sensitive information about the kingdom's defenses." King Edmund's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus could see tension building in the set of his shoulders. "What past circumstances?" Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Edmund, before we were married, before I ever met you, I had a relationship with Lord Blackwood. That relationship resulted in the birth of a son." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. King Edmund's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, hurt, confusion, and finally a careful blankness that suggested he was working hard to control his emotions. "You have a child," he said finally, his voice completely flat. "Yes. His name is Thomas. He's 5 years old now, and he's being raised by a merchant family in the countryside. They believe he's their own child, and he's never known any other parents." King Edmund leaned back in his chair, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "And Lord Blackwood is the father." "Yes, but Edmund, he abandoned me when he learned I was pregnant. I never expected to see him again. I arranged for Thomas to be adopted by good people, and I thought I had closed that chapter of my life forever." Marcus decided to interject before the conversation became too focused on the personal betrayal. "Your Majesty, the immediate security concern is that Lord Blackwood has been using this information to force Queen Isabella to provide him with intelligence about Eldoria's military capabilities and diplomatic activities. We believe he may be working for a foreign power." King Edmund's attention snapped to Marcus, and the king's expression hardened. "What sort of information has he obtained?" Isabella answered in a trembling voice. "Troop movements along the eastern border, details about trade negotiations with our neighbors, and information about the kingdom's financial reserves. I tried to limit what I shared, providing outdated or less sensitive documents when possible, but his demands have been escalating." "And his current demands?" the king asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would be devastating. "He wants the complete plans for the new coastal fortifications," Marcus said. "He's given Queen Isabella until the end of this week to provide them, or he'll reveal her secret to the court and approach her son directly." King Edmund was quiet for several long minutes, his hands stippled in front of him as he processed the full scope of the crisis. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but Marcus could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "So, Lord Blackwood has been using my wife's love for her child to turn her into a spy against her own kingdom. And now he's demanding information that could compromise our coastal defenses at a time when several of our neighbors are showing signs of aggressive intentions.
Yes, Your Majesty, Marcus confirmed. We believe he may be working for either Thorn or Solvay, both of whom would benefit significantly from knowing the details of our fortification plans. King Edmund turned to Isabella, and for the first time since the conversation began, his expression softened slightly.
Isabella, why didn't you come to me when Blackwood first approached you? Did you truly believe I would abandon you and your son because of something that happened before we ever met? Isabella finally broke down completely, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to speak. I was terrified, Edmund. I knew how important our marriage was for the kingdom's stability, how much depended on the alliances my family brought to our union. I thought if you learned about Thomas, you might feel compelled to divorce me for the good of Eldoria. And I couldn't bear the thought of Thomas being drawn into court politics, becoming a target for your enemies, or a pawn in games he could never understand. So instead, you allowed yourself to be manipulated by a man who has no concern for either you or your child, and you put the entire kingdom at risk, King Edmund said, though his tone was more sad than angry. I know it was wrong, Isabella sobbed. I know I should have trusted you, should have trusted our love, but I was so afraid of losing everything. You, Thomas, the life we've built together. Marcus watched King Edmund carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. The king was clearly struggling with conflicting emotions, hurt at Isabella's deception, concern for the kingdom's security, and what appeared to be genuine sympathy for his wife's impossible situation. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, we have 5 days to find a solution before Lord Blackwood carries out his threats. Queen Isabella cannot provide him with the fortification plans without seriously compromising national security, but if she refuses, he will likely reveal everything and potentially approach the child. King Edmund stood and began pacing behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture Marcus recognized as indicating deep thought. Captain, what do we know about Lord Blackwood's current whereabouts and activities? He's been staying at the Silver Swan Inn in the Merchant Quarter, Your Majesty. He appears to be operating alone, at least in terms of his direct contact with Queen Isabella. However, he may have associates or handlers that we haven't identified. And the child? Thomas? Is he safe in his current situation? Isabella looked up hopefully. Yes, his adoptive parents love him dearly and he seems genuinely happy. They believe he's their biological son, and they've never had any reason to question his parentage. King Edmund stopped pacing and looked directly at his wife. Isabella, I want you to understand something. I am deeply hurt that you didn't trust me enough to share this burden, and I am angry that your choices have put our kingdom at risk. However, I am not angry about Thomas's existence, and I am not interested in punishing you for something that happened before we were married. Isabella's expression became hopeful for the first time in days. Edmund, does that mean? It means that we are going to find a way to resolve this crisis together, the king said firmly. Our first priority must be neutralizing Lord Blackwood's ability to threaten either you or your son. Our second priority is ensuring that Thomas remains safe and happy, whatever that ultimately means for his future. Marcus felt a surge of relief and admiration for his king. Edmund was handling an impossible situation, with exactly the kind of wisdom and compassion that had made him such an effective ruler. What do you propose we do, Your Majesty? Marcus asked. King Edmund returned to his seat and leaned forward, his expression becoming more focused and determined. Captain, I want you to arrange discreet surveillance of Lord Blackwood. I want to know who he meets with, where he goes, and what messages he sends or receives. If he's working for a foreign power, there must be some evidence of those connections. Yes, Your Majesty, I can have my most trusted men begin monitoring him immediately. Good. Isabella, I want you to continue meeting with Blackwood as scheduled, but you will no longer provide him with any genuine intelligence. Captain Thornfield and I will prepare false documents that appear authentic, but contain misleading information about our defenses. Isabella looked uncertain, but Edmund, if he discovers that I'm giving him false information, then we'll deal with that situation when it arises, the king said firmly. But we cannot continue allowing him to extract genuine intelligence from us, regardless of the personal cost. Marcus was impressed by the king's strategic thinking, but he also saw potential problems with the approach. Your Majesty, if we're going to provide false intelligence, we need to be very careful about what kind of misinformation we share. If Blackwood's handlers realize they're being deceived, they may escalate their approach or attempt more direct action against the kingdom. Agreed. We'll need to craft documents that are convincing enough to satisfy Blackwood temporarily while we work to identify and neutralize his network. How long do you think you'll need to gather intelligence on his activities? Give me 48 hours, Your Majesty. If Blackwood is communicating with foreign handlers, we should be able to identify some pattern in his movements or contacts within that time frame. King Edmund nodded. Very well. Isabella, you'll meet with Blackwood tomorrow evening as planned, but instead of the fortification plans, you'll provide him with the false documents we prepare. Tell him you need more time to obtain the complete set of plans and arrange another meeting for later in the week.
Edmund, Isabella said hesitantly, what about Thomas? Should we consider bringing him here to the palace where we can better protect him? The king was quiet for a moment.
Not yet. Moving him suddenly could alarm his adoptive parents and raise questions we're not prepared to answer. For now, he's safer where he is, with people who love him and have no connection to court politics. However, Captain Thornfield, I want discreet protection arranged for the boy and his family, just in case Blackwood decides to escalate his threats. I'll arrange it immediately, Your Majesty. As their planning session continued, Marcus found himself cautiously optimistic about their chances of resolving the crisis. King Edmund was handling the situation with characteristic intelligence and emotional maturity, and Isabella seemed genuinely committed to making amends for her deception. If they could identify Blackwood's network and neutralize his ability to threaten Isabella and Thomas, they might be able to emerge from this crisis stronger than before. However, Marcus also knew that the next few days would be critical if their deception was discovered too quickly, or if Blackwood proved more dangerous than they anticipated. The consequences could be catastrophic, not just for the royal family, but for the entire kingdom. As the meeting concluded, and they prepared to put their plan into action, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. He had gone from being a simple palace guard to becoming a key player in a conspiracy that would determine the fate of the crown. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but so was his determination to protect the people he had sworn to serve. Part 4. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated activity. Marcus had deployed his most trusted guards to maintain surveillance on Lord Blackwood while remaining completely invisible themselves. The intelligence they gathered was both illuminating and alarming. Blackwood maintained a regular schedule of meetings with various merchants and travelers, but 2 encounters stood out as particularly suspicious. Every other day, he met with a Solvay merchant named Henrik Nordahl at a tavern near the docks. The meetings were brief, but Marcus's men observed them exchanging small packages that could easily contain documents or messages. More concerning was Blackwood's weekly meeting with someone identified as Lady Cordelia Voss, allegedly a minor noble from the Kingdom of Thorn who was visiting Eldoria on family business. However, Marcus's investigation revealed that no such person existed in Thorn's nobility, suggesting that Lady Voss was operating under a false identity. The surveillance also revealed that Blackwood was far from operating alone. In addition to his regular contacts, he had been observed with at least 3 other individuals who appeared to be monitoring his activities and providing protection. This suggested a sophisticated operation with significant resources behind it. Meanwhile, King Edmund and Marcus worked together to prepare convincing false documents about Eldoria's coastal fortifications. The papers contained just enough accurate technical detail to appear authentic, while including crucial misinformation about defensive capabilities, troop placements, and supply lines. If enemy forces attempted to use this intelligence in an actual attack, they would find themselves facing substantially stronger defenses than anticipated. Isabella had been a model of cooperation throughout the preparation, offering insights into Blackwood's personality and methods that helped them craft their deception more effectively. She also provided details about the code words and verification procedures that Blackwood had established for their communications, allowing them to ensure their false documents would pass his initial scrutiny. As the time approached for Isabella's scheduled meeting with Blackwood, Marcus positioned himself and his men strategically around the chosen location, a small garden pavilion.
on the palace grounds that provided privacy while still allowing for discreet observation. The plan was for Isabella to deliver the false documents while Marcus's team gathered intelligence on any associates Blackwood might have brought with him. The meeting itself proceeded exactly as planned. Blackwood arrived alone, apparently confident in his ability to control the situation. He examined the documents Isabella provided with obvious satisfaction, though he did express some surprise that she had been able to obtain such detailed information so quickly.
"These are quite comprehensive, Your Majesty," Blackwood said with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "I confess I hadn't expected you to be quite so resourceful." Isabella maintained her composure perfectly, playing the role of a desperate woman trying to appease her blackmailer.
"I told you I would do whatever was necessary to protect my son and my marriage. These documents represent everything I could safely access without arousing suspicion." "Indeed, and I trust that our arrangement can continue to be so mutually beneficial. I have some additional requests that we can discuss at our next meeting." Marcus watched the exchange with growing anger at Blackwood's casual cruelty. The man was clearly enjoying Isabella's distress, savoring his power over someone he perceived as helpless. It took considerable self-control for Marcus to remain hidden rather than confronting Blackwood directly. After Blackwood departed, Marcus and his team followed him at a careful distance. Their patience was rewarded when Blackwood made his way directly to the Silver Swan Inn, where Lady Cordelia Voss was waiting for him in a private room. Through careful positioning and the use of a servant who had been recruited to assist their surveillance, Marcus was able to overhear portions of their conversation. "The fortification plans exceed our expectations," Blackwood was saying as Marcus's informant crept closer to the door. "The Eldorians are more vulnerable along their southern coast than our intelligence suggested. If our fleet approaches from that direction, they'll face minimal resistance until they're practically at the capital's doorstep." Lady Voss replied in a voice that carried a distinct Thorn accent despite her attempts to disguise it. "Excellent. Admiral Harwick will be pleased. He's been looking for an opportunity to test Eldoria's naval defenses without committing to a full invasion. This intelligence should allow him to plan a surgical strike that will demonstrate Thorn's superiority without risking significant casualties." Marcus felt his blood freeze. They weren't just dealing with espionage. They were dealing with intelligence gathering for what sounded like an imminent military attack. The false documents they had provided might buy them some time, but if Thorn was planning to test Eldoria's defenses in the near future, the deception would be discovered quickly. Blackwood continued. "What of our other operations in the capital? Are your people in position to provide additional intelligence if needed?" "Everything is proceeding according to schedule. We have assets placed in the military command structure, the merchant guilds, and even among the palace staff. When Admiral Harwick makes his move, we'll be able to provide real-time intelligence about Eldorian response capabilities." This revelation was even more alarming than the planned attack. Thorn had apparently been infiltrating Eldoria's government and military for some time, using a network of spies and traitors to gather intelligence and position themselves for a coordinated assault. Isabella's blackmail was just one small part of a much larger operation. Marcus retreated carefully and made his way back to the palace, his mind racing with the implications of what he had learned. This was no longer just about protecting Isabella and her son. This was about preventing what could be the opening move in a war that Eldoria was not prepared to fight. King Edmund received Marcus's report in his private study, with Isabella present to hear the full scope of the threat they were facing. The king's expression grew increasingly grim as Marcus detailed the enemy network and the planned naval assault. "So Blackwood is working for Thorn, and they're planning to use the intelligence he's gathered to launch an attack on our southern coast," King Edmund summarized. "Do we have any indication of timing?" "Based on what I overheard, it sounds like they're planning to move soon, possibly within the next few weeks. Lady Voss mentioned that Admiral Harwick was looking for an opportunity to test our defenses, suggesting this may be intended as a limited engagement rather than a full invasion." Isabella looked stricken. "Edmund, this is all my fault. If I had come to you from the beginning, what's done is done," the king said firmly. "Our priority now is protecting the kingdom and neutralizing this threat. Captain, what do you recommend?" Marcus had been considering their options during his return to the palace. "Your Majesty, I believe we have a unique opportunity to turn this situation to our advantage. Blackwood and his associates believe they have successfully infiltrated our defenses and obtained crucial intelligence. We can use that confidence against them.
How so? We continue to feed them false information, but we escalate our deception. Instead of simply providing misleading defensive plans, we give them intelligence that will draw their forces into a trap.
We convince them that our southern coast is more vulnerable than it actually is, encouraging them to commit to an attack that we'll be prepared to repel decisively. King Edmund leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the proposal.
That's a dangerous gamble, Captain. If our deception fails, we could find ourselves facing an attack we're not prepared for.
Yes, Your Majesty, but if it succeeds, we can eliminate a significant portion of Thorn's naval capability while simultaneously exposing their entire spy network within our kingdom. It would send a clear message to all of our enemies about the consequences of underestimating Eldoria. Isabella spoke up hesitantly. What about Thomas? If we're going to war with Thorn, how do we ensure his safety? We don't wait for the war to come to us, King Edmund said decisively. Captain, how quickly can you organize the arrest of all known members of Blackwood's network? If we move simultaneously at dawn tomorrow, we can apprehend Blackwood, Lady Voss, and the merchant Nordahl before any of them has an opportunity to warn the others. However, we'll need to be careful not to alert any network members we haven't yet identified. Agreed.
And once we have them in custody?
We offer them a choice, Marcus suggested.
They can provide us with complete information about Thorn's plans and help us set up our trap, or they can face execution for treason and espionage.
King Edmund was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of such an aggressive approach. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We'll move against the known conspirators tomorrow at dawn. Isabella, you'll attend your scheduled meeting with Blackwood this evening and behave normally. We want him to believe everything is proceeding according to his plans until the moment we arrest him. What should I tell him if he asks about additional intelligence? Tell him you're working on obtaining more detailed information about troop movements and supply lines. Suggest that you may be able to provide even more valuable intelligence in the coming weeks. We want him to believe that his operation is expanding, rather than about to be shut down. As they finalized their plans for the arrests and the subsequent interrogations, Marcus reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved. What had begun as a simple blackmail scheme had revealed a sophisticated enemy operation that threatened the very security of the kingdom. But it had also provided them with an unprecedented opportunity to strike back against their enemies while they believed themselves to be in a position of strength. The next morning's arrests proceeded flawlessly. Blackwood was taken into custody at the Silver Swan Inn. Lady Voss was apprehended at a safe house in the merchant quarter, and Henrik Nordahl was arrested as he attempted to leave the city with what appeared to be sensitive documents. None of the conspirators had an opportunity to warn their associates or destroy evidence. The interrogations that followed revealed the full scope of Thorn's infiltration of Eldoria. The spy network included 2 junior officers in the military, a clerk in the Treasury Department, and 3 merchants who had been providing intelligence about trade routes and economic conditions. Most shocking of all, one of the palace servants who had been working in the royal quarters for over a year was discovered to be a Thorn agent. With this intelligence in hand, King Edmund was able to begin planning a comprehensive counterintelligence operation that would not only neutralize the immediate threat, but also position Eldoria to launch its own intelligence operations against Thorn. The false information about coastal defenses was refined and made even more convincing, setting up what would become known as the Battle of Crimson Bay, where Thorn's surprise naval attack was met by a fully prepared Eldorian fleet that had been reinforced specifically to repel the assault. But perhaps most importantly for Marcus, the crisis had resolved the personal dilemma that had begun everything. With Blackwood in custody and his blackmail scheme exposed, Queen Isabella was finally free to make decisions about her son's future based on love rather than fear. King Edmund's response to learning about Thomas had been everything Isabella had hoped for and more. Not only did he forgive her deception, but he also expressed genuine interest in meeting the boy and potentially bringing him into the royal household if that would be best for his welfare. The child is innocent of any wrongdoing, the king had said when they discussed Thomas's future. If his adoptive parents are willing, and if he would be happier here with us, then I would be honored to raise him as my own son. If he's content where he is, then we'll ensure he remains safe and provide for his education and future without disrupting the only family he's ever known. In the end, after careful consideration and consultation with Thomas's adoptive parents, It was decided that the boy would remain with the merchant family who had raised him, but that he would also be acknowledged as a member of the royal household. He would receive the education and opportunities appropriate to his status while maintaining the loving relationships that had shaped his early years. Prince Adrian, who had been struggling with the burden of keeping Isabella's secret, was relieved to learn that the truth had finally been revealed and resolved. The young prince had shown remarkable maturity throughout the crisis, and his discretion had been crucial in preventing the situation from escalating prematurely. As Marcus reflected on the events of the past week, he realized that his greatest challenge as a member of the royal guard had not come from external enemies or physical threats, but from navigating the complex moral and ethical dilemmas that arose when personal loyalty conflicted with duty to the crown. In the end, the solution had required not choosing between these competing obligations, but finding a way to fulfill both simultaneously. The secret that had threatened to destroy the royal family had ultimately made them stronger. King Edmund's wisdom and compassion had transformed a potential scandal into an opportunity for growth and reconciliation. Isabella had learned that trust and honesty were more powerful than deception and fear. And Marcus had discovered that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with swords and armor, but with courage, integrity, and the willingness to do what was right even when the path forward was unclear. The kingdom of Eldoria emerged from the crisis more secure than it had been before, with a spy network neutralized, an enemy's attack plans exposed, and a royal family united by shared trials and mutual forgiveness. And in a small house in the countryside, a 5-year-old boy named Thomas continued to grow up, loved and protected, unaware that his existence had once threatened to change the course of history, but ultimately had helped to secure the future of an entire kingdom. The shock in the palace had indeed shaken everyone involved. But like a building that emerges stronger after surviving an earthquake, the royal household had weathered the storm and emerged with its foundations more solid than ever before.